sometime in the next few decades, humans will leave this planet to live in another world.
That means that some people in our life can be the first Martians. How about that?
We're finding out a lot about how to explore Mars in our station. Over 1,000 people from over 40 countries have actually participated in one crew or another.
It's the grandest adventure I could possibly imagine. That is, for me, the most important reason why we should pursue the establishment of life on Mars.
If we go to Mars in our time, 200 years from now, there'll be new branches of human civilization on Mars.
Hey everybody, welcome to Red Planet Live. I'm your host Ron Craig, and today I have the pleasure to be here with Dr. Graham Lau. So I'm very excited. So Dr. Graham Lau, he's an astrobiologist and communicator of science with an academic background spanning biology, chemistry, astrophysics, and geology. Dr. Lau is an expert on how living things affect the environment around them and how we search for alien life beyond the Earth. He serves as the Director of Communications and Marketing for Blue Marble Space, as a research scientist with the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science, as the Director of Logistics for the University Rover Challenge, and as the host of the NASA-funded show Ask an Astrobiologist, which is awesome, by the way. Dr. Lau also serves as a meditation instructor and public speaking coach. So I'm just going to bring Dr. Lau on. Hey, Graham, welcome to the show.
Hey, all. Pleasure to join you.
Hey, I love that salute. That's awesome. You've been practicing that for some time.
No, yeah, the Vulcan Salute. You have to do it. I mean, I think even after the pandemic, which whenever that happens, I think I'm still going to just continue doing the Vulcan Salute instead of handshakes.
Yeah, I think another thing too. I know I was seeing some of your posts on social media. I mean, I think that we both have a similar interest when it comes to the cold. So I've been I wouldn't say an avid and hardcore practitioner of Wim Hof methods, but I know I've seen you out there doing some shoveling. You're out there, in the freezing cold. So what got you interested in that?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a good question to start off with. I've always enjoyed a challenge. I think, a challenge, it drives us. Not only are we humans challenged to go to Mars and to explore and learn more, but I find, the challenge of meditation, of learning more about what's inside of me, and the challenge of pushing my body to limits. I grew up training in the martial arts and doing weightlifting, and that's continued now well into my adult life. I still train in the martial arts almost every day. I still lift weights nearly every day. And so I think there was just this allure for doing some of this cold immersion training. And along the way in my training through life, I tried different breath work practices. And so something about, Wim Hof's approach really kind of spoke to me. And so I've been using his breathing for some time. I also use CO2 and O2 tables from freediving to train in breath retention. But I've also then been going out and snowshoeing without a jacket on and doing cold immersion by jumping into freezing cold water. And I don't know, it's kind of, when you get past like the mental barrier of the challenge, like it actually becomes really, really fun.
Yeah. Well, I just think too that if you actually ever get to go into space and go and actually help settle one of these planets that we actually are looking to go to at some point, you're going to be well adapted to some of that cold environment. You might even be able to go without a spacesuit.
Well, I don't know. The cold on the surface of Mars is pretty darn cold. It's a bit below where I'm jumping into freezing cold lakes and stuff like that. But
yeah, next level, next time.
Yeah, exactly.
So one thing I wanted to kind of talk about too is that so you actually are the host of Ask an Astrobiologist. So I wanted to kind of talk a little bit about that show. I mean, I've actually seen a number of your episodes. So, I mean, you've got amazing guests on that. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of maybe talk a little bit about that show, about your show, and just, take it away.
Yeah, Ask an Astrobiologist is funded by the NASA Astrobiology program, but it was first developed by SaganNet, the Social Action for a Grassroots Astrobiology Network, which was created by several early career researchers in astrobiology a little over a decade ago now. who wanted to have their own network for other young, people interested in astrobiology to come together. And part of this early development of SaganNet was a show they created called Talk to an Astrobiologist, where the audience could, submit questions and they would share it with someone, and they would record themselves, usually like in their office at a university or something like that. And they would answer questions about astrobiology. And eventually, NASA Astrobiology, which at the same time had their own program of Ask an Astrobiologist, which was primarily run by a scientist named Dave Morrison, who would answer questions online that people had about the search for life in the universe and our quest to understand the nature of life. And so they wanted to kind of, bring that forward into the more modern, era of technology of what we're doing in podcasting and live video and stuff like that. And so those two things kind of came together as our show, Ask an Astrobiologist. At first, it was hosted by Sanjoy Sam, a good friend of mine, and the CEO of the company I work for, Blue Marble Space. And eventually I came in as co-host, and then slowly over time I became the host of the show. And yeah, it's an incredible show. We once a month we do a live stream interview with another astrobiologist, where I have a chance for a half an hour to ask my questions about their work and their lives and their hobbies. And then the audience can have a half an hour of questions from the live stream on YouTube, as well as through Twitter. They can ask questions about the research this person is doing, or about their life, about how they got into their career as an astrobiologist. And we've had some remarkable guests on the show. I've been very blessed to have some wonderful conversations. And just next week, I have Mark Skidmore joining me on the show. Mark is a microbiologist who studies living things in cold environments, and I'll kind of talk to him about his research in these cold systems and microbiology here on Earth, and what that means for looking for life in other worlds like Europa or Enceladus, or even on Mars.
Yeah, that's going to actually be a nice way to turn the table, so to speak, because, as a communicator, you're obviously, as you are today, you're a guest on the show, and people are always probing you and asking you questions, and you're doing brain dumps about everything in the field. And of course, it's nice to actually be able to flip that around and actually say, you know what, I have my own questions, and I want to talk to people, and I want them to, because you want to learn things too, and everybody has all these different perspectives and points of views, and everybody has different, focus areas and sub-focus areas. So it's actually, I think it's nice to actually to have that opportunity because we're constantly learning. I mean, every day there's something to learn, right?
No matter what side of the camera you're on, you always have a chance to learn and be involved in the conversation, and that's the best part of it.
All right. So I have a couple questions that, and actually before I get into those, I just wanted to kind of mention to the audience. Obviously, it's awesome to have you here, and if you have any questions for Dr. Lau, just place them in the chat, and then as we get a break in going through the topics, we'll make sure that we get to your questions if we can. So one of the questions I had come in is I think it's kind of broad. Is what is NASA Astrobiology up to these days?
Yeah, NASA Astrobiology has really come very far. The development of astrobiology at NASA is somewhat young. Exobiology has been around for a long time, but the word astrobiology being used by NASA really kind of took off in '96 after the Allen Hills meteorite paper came out. And I was a kid when that happened, and Bill Clinton came out in the White House and made this announcement that we might have found signs of life from Mars in a meteorite. And since that time, NASA Astrobiology has done so much. They developed the NASA Astrobiology Institute, which was around for around 20 years, really kind of built the astrobiology network, not just for NASA and for the US, but around the world. The NASA Astrobiology Institute really started some of these large-scale research endeavors with multiple laboratories from different universities and NASA centers, and from other nations and other groups working together to answer big questions in astrobiology. The NAI is now gone, and now the NASA Astrobiology program, not only are they funding, my show for Ask an Astrobiologist, but they're also, very involved in the funding and the programming for a lot of different research going on in astrobiology. We now have these research coordination networks, or RCNs, through NASA Astrobiology, which I'm a member of one of them called NFOLD, which is the Network for Life Detection. This is a large, multi-university, multi-NASA centered group, with a lot of us from around the world interested in the science of life detection. The science, the technology, the instruments. How do we actually go out there and look for life? And what are we looking for in looking for life out there? These are really big questions. And so it's really cool to be part of one of these NASA astrobiology RCNs as well. There are others. There's Nexus, which focuses on exoplanet research. There's the Network for Ocean Worlds, which focuses on worlds like Europa and Enceladus and other ocean worlds. There's one that focuses on prebiotic chemistry and the early environments of the Earth as well. And so NASA astrobiology is doing a lot of stuff in moving the field forward in astrobiology.
Mm-hmm. Now, this might be a kind of a hard question to go at, but I'm just wondering, I'm sure people actually out there wonder, why do we care so much about actually detecting life on other planets and worlds? Well, we should use worlds. I think that's actually a phrase that we should go with. I know there's been some confusion out there about Pluto is causing us lots of trouble. Let's just use worlds. But why do we actually want to find life? Like, what is the importance for us? And I'm not thinking like, I guess, we can look at this from many different angles, from philosophy, but if we look at it from the scientific purpose, like, why do we want to find life on Mars, on Venus? Why are we looking so hard for this?
Well, I do have to say, I don't think we can disentangle it from philosophy or sociology or psychology. The human experience is one of curiosity, of exploration. To explore is human. We want to know more about our surroundings and our environment and each other. And so this question of are we alone has been with us for an extremely long time. And in some ways, astrobiology is, the culmination of all that we've done in philosophy and science over the millennia, bringing us to this point of understanding our place in the universe. And so, there is this search for life out there is a very big piece of astrobiology. And a lot of times when people think about astrobiology, that's the first thing they think is we're looking for aliens. And yeah, we are. I would love to find some aliens. That'd be really cool. I would have a job, for sure, for the future. But astrobiology is really the quest to understand the nature of life, period. And so it includes, our origins here on Earth. How did life start here on Earth? Did life start multiple times on Earth? Did life potentially come here from another world and then be seeded here on Earth? And we don't know the answer to that yet. How did life, evolve with our world through time to create such a magnificent and diverse biosphere that we have now? And what is the future of life? Not just for all of the living things here on Earth, but also for us as a civilization. What is our civilizational longevity like? And by asking these big questions about whether or not there's life out there, it helps us to frame some of our thinking of our own place here on the planet. And so, astrobiology really is a very big field. There are lots of different scientific disciplines coming together. People have to learn how to speak across the fence when it comes to oceanography and geochemistry and astrophysics and planetary science and geochemistry and biology and all these other fields coming together. But it also requires that we are talking about philosophy and psychology, sociology, the human imprint in this realm of study as well. And so I think it's very important that we accept that astrobiology is science, but it's also going beyond the science to bring in other studies of what it means to be human and what it means to ask those big questions.
Oh, no, I agree 100%. I think, actually we had a question come in that I think is really relevant to, and I'll just bring that up here from Matt T. So, from a non-astrobiologist, is life defined as a carbon-based organism, or is there most likely a broader definition? Because I think we remember back to school, we always go back to our school text back in high school, and they talk about, well, this is what we define life as. Now, just to go to this question, what do you think?
Yeah, so you're not going to like this, but we actually do not know exactly what life is. So there have been several hundred attempts at creating a definition of life. And even if you go online right now, you might see what we call sometimes the NASA definition of life, that life is a self-contained chemical system capable of undergoing Darwinian evolution. It's a pretty good definition of life as we know it, and it might even fit some other kinds of life forms that are different than life on Earth, but there's a lot of problems with it. And so there's a lot of it. There have been a lot of attempts through time to characterize, maybe not define life, but characterize what life does. And so we're still learning in that realm as well. So life as we know it, yes, life as we know it is carbon-based. We've never discovered any other form of life yet. And carbon, when it comes down to it, is a very wonderful element for life to be based on. Carbon makes really beautiful multiple bonds to other carbon elements, can make these long chains, and big circles and all kinds of structures that allows for it to be a very good backbone for life as we know it, and can create a large range of molecules, these organic molecules that all of the different things inside of our cells are stemming from. That said, maybe there are other forms of life that aren't just using carbon. Perhaps you've heard of silicon-based life. Yeah. Silicon is just below carbon on the periodic table. It makes 4 bonds the same way that carbon does chemically, but those silicon-silicon bonds aren't nearly as strong as the carbon-carbon bonds, and in certain environments that silicon actually would not be a very good backbone for life. But there are very specific environments where silicon-based life might actually work very, very well chemically. And so it's worth looking into. Maybe there's life out there that is silicon-based. And also, we use DNA and RNA for our genetic material, and we use proteins for our cellular structures, and we have these phospholipids, these fats that make up the cell structures of our cells. Maybe there's life out there that's doing something a little bit different. And so right now, a lot of us are thinking, how can we look for life while also not being so biased towards just life as we know it? And so it's a really big undertaking, which again is part of the beauty of astrobiology. We have people from these different fields of biochemistry and physics and astronomy coming together to try to answer these questions using their different understanding from their different disciplines.
Awesome. Because I think, us being, on this planet and on this sphere, we're somewhat biased because of our limited scope. We can't, it's hard to define, all the different types of life that could be out there just because we don't know. We can't see what's out there. There could be, we're hoping, maybe that, we do see, I think, when I think back to kind of, my physics training and going through school, is that, our star and the other stars in the universe are all made of the same stuff. And it was kind of amazing that you're thinking that, if we go and look at another star, another galaxy, we actually look, we break it up into the light spectrum, we say, it's got the same stuff. The stars are all made of the same stuff. So potentially life could, but we just don't know. I mean, that's the thing. I think a lot of people try to make assumptions. They try to maybe dream a little bit and say, life could be this. They could also be Vulcans. They could be, but the thing is, we just don't know. It's hard to make any kind of assumptions. It's fun to dream, but dreaming isn't necessarily science, right? So.
But dreaming is a very human thing to do too. And so oftentimes I will throw some cold water on people's fire. And I will say that, as a scientist, and if there's any, if you're thinking rationally and logically, you have to admit that we could be alone. Yep. Based on all of our current knowledge and our current data, we could be alone. That is one possible thing. The probability could be 0 that there's life out there. However, when you start to dream and you start really just feeling, and learning about all the possible worlds out there, there's so many worlds out there, so many planets, so many possible environments that could allow for life to arise and to evolve. If it's even remotely simple for life to originate on other worlds, then there must be many worlds out there with life. And so even though we don't have any evidence yet, it really feels like there must be something out there. You've heard that term before, I'm sure. If it is just us, it must be a huge waste of space because there's just so much potential out there in the universe.
Yeah. Well, since space is nothing, I guess it's a huge waste of nothing, I suppose, right? So, but it's no, I agree with you. But and of course we could get into, and I'm sure we could have a whole show talking about the Fermi paradox, and all this. I mean, it's such a huge field where people try to say, where are they, right? Where is everybody? And of course, not everybody, and of course, all the different stages of life as well, right? I mean, whether the universe could be teeming with microbes, we just don't know, and that's intelligent life, and but it's going to be amazing. I'm hopeful. I'm definitely very optimistic about us actually being able to get a signal or some sort of detection. I mean, and actually that might actually jump into what we're able to do now. And I know with with our current technology, I know we have very limited means to even look at life in our own solar system from a remote, let's say, remote context. I mean, obviously that's why we're sending rovers to Mars. And so if we actually talk about that, maybe you can give us actually an update about Perseverance, because I mean, one of its main mandates was to actually for life detection.
Yeah, so no life from Perseverance yet, but it still has a long life ahead of it. I mean, I was just reading today about Curiosity, and I remember when Curiosity landed on Mars in 2012, and we're going on a decade now of Curiosity collecting samples and doing incredible research. Perseverance is only, less than a year out right now. It still has so much more data collection ahead for us to really explore Jezero Crater. I'm super excited still for all the data that's going to come back from the Raman spectrometer on board this spacecraft, this rover. There's still so much more for us to learn for. But yes, we've not detected any life yet from Perseverance, but there's a lot more ahead as the mission really gets underway and when we start really getting into sampling some of these materials, as well as for caching these samples too. It was a big get to even have sample collection and caching in this mission. Even if we don't even have the infrastructure built yet for going and collecting those samples, bringing them back to Earth, and then getting them here safely for study. But getting those samples back will be a huge undertaking. There's so much we can do on the surface of Mars with robots, but when it comes down to it, the amount of research we can get done with humans in laboratories with high precision instruments, it's just remarkably, more that we can get out of those samples than we can with the instruments on board those robots.
Awesome. I got a question, actually. My own question here that maybe you can clear up for me is that we see these media likes to throw things out here sometimes, and they talk about possible detections, and they always talk about, let's say, possibly finding carbon signatures. And we just had an article recently that came out that said that we detected carbon signatures on Mars. Now, what is the difference between finding a carbon signature and going to that next stage that actually could be potentially life?
Oh, it's huge. It's extremely huge. And the authors of the paper in question that you're discussing, that just came out recently, they never said, they found life. They recommended primarily 3 ways that they might have found this very unique signature in the carbon that they were exploring from the Curiosity rover, from 24 different samples that were collected over since 2012 through July of last year. They were looking at evolved carbon from some of these samples and measuring the isotopes of carbon-13 and carbon-12 inside of these samples. And what they found was a very unique pattern, a signal of the isotopes of carbon-12 to carbon-13 inside of these materials. And so in trying to figure out how they can explain these unique signals, they gave 3 potential mechanisms that could form it. One of them being, flying through some cosmic dust, as our solar system roughly every 100 million years goes through one of these giant molecular clouds, and so some dust could rain down. It could be a signal from some cosmic dust. Another possibility was, basically like volcanic eruptions releasing carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere, and that being broken down through photoreactions with sunlight in the atmosphere. But another potential way for them to have found this signature in the carbon isotopes is through a biological catalysis, through a biological process. Here on Earth, when we find a similar signal in carbon isotopes, it's driven by biology. And so one potential mechanism for what they discovered could be biological activity functioning to reduce methane, to break down methane into organic material, basically eating the methane to make this material. And so it's very interesting, and it adds more to this debate we've had going, this mystery of the Mars methane and where it's coming from. We know that there are these little whiffs of methane occurring on Mars, and so we're learning more all the time for that. But in the paper, they never say this is life detection. That's a huge jump, and many of us in the scientific community and the astrobiology community are very cautious about this. And generally, when you see the debate happening about it, they claimed it was aliens. Usually that's not from the scientists. Usually that's from the journalists having their own debate about what we said as scientists.
Yeah, that's. We're seeing that happening all the times in the media now, is where these bait lines and these taglines are kind of skewing. Really, if you don't click in and actually read the article, of course, that doesn't necessarily help you as well. You have to actually, of course, we talk about that in many times, is that we have to actually have multiple sources. Don't just believe what you read from one paper or one source. It's good to actually bring a lot of different sources in, and then make up your own mind from that point. But it's amazing. So another thing I was thinking about as well in the solar system right now. So in terms of what we are, let's say our hopes for finding life. We have Mars, we have Venus, we have Europa, we have Titan. What do you think is, where should we be looking? Like, where do you think our best, let's say the best odds of, or maybe the most interesting from your perspective, to actually send a mission to we're looking?
I like gambling, but this is a really hard one to put odds on. Mars might be a good candidate. We know that in Mars's ancient past, there was a lot of water activity. Mars has a surface that's easy for us to explore by sending our robots. Our orbiters can get great imagery. But like Venus, has been a love of mine for a very long time. I've argued for many years now that if there was ever life on another world beyond Earth in any point in our solar system's history, it would have most likely been Venus long ago. In the early solar system, Venus would have been much more like the planet Earth. It may have had oceans. We have some good modeling to suggest it might have had oceans, a more clement atmosphere. But things changed on Venus, within the last 1 billion to 500 million years. Not only with the entire crust appearing to have melted mostly, but then the runaway greenhouse effect driving the surface of Venus up to several hundreds of degrees, 92 times the surface pressure that we have here at the surface of the Earth. And so the surface of Venus is a hellscape. It rains sulfuric acid on Venus, but it's so hot and so dense at the surface, the sulfuric acid never hits the surface. It just re-evaporates and goes back up again. It's a place where our longest lived spacecraft on the surface of Venus, Venera 13, lasted for 127 minutes on the surface.
Yep.
And that's not that long because it's a dangerous place to be. And now mostly I'm sure your audience has heard we have this more recent paper that came out about a year ago from Jane Greaves and colleagues suggesting the detection of phosphine in the atmosphere of Venus from observatories here on the Earth. And it's given us some good debate now in the scientific community about whether or not that phosphine detection was real, whether or not there actually is as much phosphine as they claimed to have been there based on their data. And now it's also led to a more recent paper that just came out from some of the same co-authors suggesting a way that life could actually make a more clement environment in the acidic material in the atmosphere of Venus. I still think Venus is a great candidate for us to explore more for potential signs of life. I'm very glad that NASA just selected 2 missions to send there. There are other missions coming up as well. I would not be surprised if Roscosmos really did try to get a mission going forward for Venus here very soon. And so, this paper really launched more interest in Venus again, which is great. I'd like to see some stuff going on there. But, there's Europa, there's Enceladus. I mean, with Enceladus, we have a world that is literally spewing its ocean into space for us to go look at. We could just go fly a spacecraft through it and collect material and look at it for signs of life. And so Enceladus is so promising because of that. I'm also a huge fan of Europa, though. That ocean, even with more conservative estimates from our modeling, that ocean still has more water than all of the oceans on our planet. And so there's a lot of potential down in that ocean of Europa that really just, as a human being, it just begs for exploration for us to go find out more about it.
Now, for Europa, and of course, that's a Clipper mission. I think that they're looking to send there with that. So now, in terms of Europa, is it actually water that we're thinking? Like, is it or some sort of brine type solution potentially?
Yeah, based on the current data, primarily which came from the Galileo spacecraft, which went to the Jovian system quite some time ago, we were measuring the magnetic field, the induced magnetic field around Jupiter from Europa, which is how we were able to model the existence of a briny ocean, a salty ocean down below. So it most likely is water. It's most likely very salty water. So with Europa Clipper, we're not going to get into the ocean with Clipper, unfortunately. Europa Clipper is not going to land or drill or any of that stuff. The Clipper mission, which is led by Bob Pappalardo, is going to orbit around Jupiter and Europa together and do a lot of really close flybys. It's going to get really decent resolution mapping of almost all of Europa, a large portion of the surface of the moon, and then it's going to get very, very high resolution mapping of a small amount as well. And so we'll finally have really good high resolution mapping of the surface to find out if we can land there very easily, or if we have to really engineer through how we're going to land on top of that icy surface. It'll help us, though, to really constrain the depth and the composition of that ocean a lot better. And there still is a potential chance that there could be plumes of water intermittently coming out of Europa. So much like with Enceladus, Enceladus changes when its plumes are coming out based on its orbit around Saturn as the crust is kind of flexing. And so for Europa, there's been some data from the Hubble Space Telescope showing potential signs of water emissions in large plumes, also from Europa's southern hemisphere. And so with Clipper, there's actually an instrument being built right here in Colorado called SUDA, which will be on board. It'll be great for measuring dust and some of the material around Europa that's in orbit around Europa and around Jupiter. But if there are water plumes, this instrument could actually measure some of the materials in those water plumes if the spacecraft flies through them, which is also, it's, we don't know if it's there or not, but it's a pretty cool thing for us to be prepared for. Because for Enceladus, we actually didn't know there were giant plumes of water erupting all the time out of Enceladus until we got there.
No, it's amazing. I mean, one thing that I've noticed, if you're thinking about what's going on in space exploration today, I mean, it's just monumental. It's incredible. I think, I haven't seen this much buzz and this much excitement around space, since we were talking about the Apollo era. It's just incredible how quickly things are moving, which is fantastic for us, space and science nerds and fans, and and of course you as a scientist having access to this, because the fact that we are going to be sending missions to Europa, sending missions to Venus. I mean, you got to be elated with how much effort is actually being put in and how much dedication that's happening here. It's got to be just phenomenal.
Oh yeah, I say this often, that people so often romanticize the past and the future in a very unfortunate way. People are like, I was born too late to be a pirate and too early to be Captain Kirk, or something like that. And honestly, like, the era of piracy in the Atlantic was not a great era for most people. We certainly still have our own problems right now in the present day, and we certainly should be addressing those problems in the present day. But we so often romanticize eras outside of our own as though they're somehow special and beautiful, without really giving our own time the credit it deserves. We live in a monumental time. You're right. Like, space exploration is changing very quickly. We are doing so much more now in space than we've ever done before. And it's very likely in the next few decades, we're doing even more, going back to the moon, sending humans finally to Mars, exploring more of these worlds. We have missions going to Venus. We have a mission going to Jupiter. Most likely we're going to have some new, really cool robots going to Enceladus and Titan, these other worlds. And so there's so much to be excited for. We're also, right now learning so much more about ourselves through medical science, through explorations of philosophy. There's so much more that we're doing right now. And so it's a pretty groovy time to be alive. And honestly, for me as an astrobiologist, even though I would never put down a date, I would never say, in 1 year or 10 years or 20 years, we're going to find definitive signs of life out there. I would say that if life out in the universe is common, especially in our little bubble, our little region of the Milky Way galaxy, because right now, a lot of what we're looking at when it comes to exoplanets, a lot of our research, we're really looking at things very close to us in a bubble of a few thousand light years here in our portion of the Milky Way. If life is common at all in this region of the Milky Way, we are so very close to knowing that. Not just because of explorations in our own solar system, but with all that we're doing now with exoplanet science, with the James Webb Space Telescope that just launched, it still has a few more months to cool down enough for us to actually collect first light and start doing data collection with it. James Webb is going to do so much more for learning about these exoplanets. We have more coming up, like the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope, and some version of the LaVoir telescope will be developed as well. We have this next generation of space telescopes coming online that are going to help us explore these worlds around other stars in all new ways. And so we're just at this beautiful cusp right now of what it means to be exploring the cosmos and not knowing if we're alone.
Awesome. So, Graham, I was going to think, if you don't mind, I was going to go to and see, look at some of the questions that are coming in from the audience. So we actually have one right here, actually coming in from LinkedIn from Mike B. So, and I think this is a great one. So, it appears what is becoming the biggest challenge to space exploration by humans is the human biology itself. What is your estimate on biology catching up with hardware technology's capabilities?
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. So, and many of us have kind of discussed this before in the realm of space exploration. Do we need to genetically modify, genetically engineer ourselves as humans? Do we need to change our biology that drastically in order to go explore places like Mars and Venus and other worlds? And there's no clear-cut answer to that. We have a lot of people have thought very well about how could we send humans to Mars right now, and let's be clear, like we could do it right now if we had enough funding, we could send humans to Mars today, and we have the technology to help them survive on the surface, and people have been studying this for a very long time. That said, maybe it would be easier if we could change ourselves biologically to be more prepared for the space environment, to be able to survive on long duration trips. Maybe if we put money into it, we could genetically engineer humans to be able to evolve into a new species on new worlds. There's a really fun sci-fi horror film called Pandorum, which if you are interested in sci-fi horror, feel free to watch. But one thing I like in this film is that they have these travelers on their way to a new world, and they're feeding them this juice that's going to help their bodies to adapt to their new environment. And it's also going to help them somehow, they don't really say how, but it's going to help them to evolve into their new environment. So there must be some form of genetic engineering or gamete modification or something going on there. And so I think maybe the bigger thing that we should be asking ourselves about, modifying ourselves biologically is more about the ethics of it. Ought we to change ourselves biologically? What happens to the human species if we start doing that? And so that's a really important realm as well. In catching up to our technological capabilities is catching up in our philosophical and moral capabilities. Should we do those things, or should we hold back a little bit and maybe think through what we actually want to achieve in exploring space?
Yeah, and I think that, how practical is that? Because, it's not something that you would expect to be just overnight. It might even be something that has to be done from an embryo. And of course, then we're going to definitely get into a lot of debates happening at that point. We're already seeing that with the stem cell research. So I think, yeah, it's going to be an interesting, and, I don't know whether or not we, do we really need to go to that level to do that? I think life here, I think, this is a question and something I thought about for a long time is, life on Earth. I think, it's not something that just appeared, we didn't just come here, it took 3.5 billion years or more, of life evolving, surviving mass extinction events, and it took, it was a rigorous journey, very rigorous journey for life, I think, on Earth to reach the point to have the resiliency that we have today. But I think, we still are at this point where we are kind of designed to be here, and I think about this because, if you go to sci-fi shows, like something like Star Trek, you see them beaming down to every planet in the galaxy, no spacesuits, nothing, just showing up and, able to breathe the atmosphere. But I think, I look at that and I kind of chuckle at sometimes and say, it sounds fantastic, but the reality is that the composition of each planet most likely isn't going to be the same as Earth. So we probably can't just go walking around most of the planets even if they are something that is, that can sustain life, whether it can sustain our life is the question, right?
Yeah. So, in the original Star Trek, they didn't really offer any explanation for that. They just beam down and just go and walk around. I do like in later Star Trek, they tried to actually make up a reason why it was possible. There were these Class M planets that are the planets that we can survive on. But you're right. I mean, so that's kind of part of storytelling. In science fiction, we're doing storytelling that way. But yeah, and the movie Prometheus, which I thought was pretty terrible. The biologist would never be the first person taking his helmet off. I mean, he would think through that, all the potential viruses and bacteria alone, or other organisms we don't even understand on that world that might just destroy us. It's more of a funny movie for me to watch, if anything, because of how silly it really is in the writing. But yeah, you're right. I mean, we have evolved and adapted very well to our planet. Our biosphere and our planet are very linked, and life on this world is very dependent on the processes of our planet as well. However, that doesn't mean that we can't, go and go to another world and begin exploring or even settling there. It might take some work and be a challenge, but there's no reason that we can't do it right now, especially with a world like Mars. Some other worlds in our solar system would be more of a challenge right now with our current technologies. Not impossible. One thing I love in the Expanse series of novels and the television show are all these space stations they have, throughout the solar system and the outer solar system, and as well as, creating, these bases, these settlements inside of asteroids. Creating a settlement inside of Ceres is a great idea. We could totally do that right now. That's a great way for us to start extending humanity outward in our solar system as well. So there's a lot of potential for us as humans in our current form to go explore.
Okay. Awesome. We got another question come in, and Anna Roop's going to throw you a hard one. So Anna Roop, how you doing? So if there is life on the icy moons, what kind of organisms can we expect in Europa, Enceladus, and of course don't forget Titan, and not the movie Titan, not that guy that was dropped on the planet in the movie.
Yeah, so good question, Anurup. I will say first, hello, Anurup. Anurup is one of my visiting scholars at Blue Marble Space Institute of Science. I also see him becoming like the next director of astrobiology for all of ISRO in India. Anurup is fantastic, and it's a good question. And the truth is that we don't really quite know yet. We know that, in Enceladus and Europa specifically, we're looking at, oceans. We're looking at the oceans of these worlds, not their surfaces. The surfaces are extremely cold on Enceladus and Europa. Very little atmosphere, just tenuous atmosphere, a little bit of gas around. And then especially for Europa being around Jupiter and that close to it, it's bombarded constantly by radioactive materials, radiation at the surface. And so we're really thinking about, life down below the ice, maybe in the ice or down inside of the ocean, really is what we're looking for. And so if there are, potentially hydrothermal vents like we have here, since the 1970s, we've been exploring these black smokers, these big chimneys where ocean water is taken down into the crust of the ocean, heated up by the mantle, and then comes back up at several hundred degrees, bringing with it a lot of the chemistry of the rocks it passed through. It's leaching out metals and bringing with it great chemistry for life to use, to eat, and to metabolize. There are also lower temperature hydrothermal systems that rely on something called serpentinization, for instance, where certain minerals are interacting with the water, and the reactions are creating hydrogen and creating this beautiful garden, this environment for life to thrive. A good question is, can life originate in an ocean? And we don't know yet. We don't know if life can start in oceans or if it needs to start on dry land. There's a hypothesis from Bruce Damer and Dave Deemer that life has to start in a dry environment with the cyclical process of wetting and drying around geothermal systems here on the Earth. But maybe life can start around hydrothermal vents, and so then Europa and Enceladus become much better targets. And then we're most likely thinking about life forms that are utilizing some of those basic metabolisms we find in those environments, maybe methanogenesis, maybe taking hydrogen and carbon dioxide and making methane, maybe certain forms of sulfur metabolisms, either reducing or oxidizing sulfur in these deep ocean systems. But if life can originate in the ocean of Europa and can create, a beautiful garden of microbial life around a hydrothermal vent, maybe there has been enough time for more complex systems to form. I personally don't believe we're going to find whales in Europa, or a whale-like creature, some big cetacean kind of thing. But, maybe there are other life forms inside of that ocean just waiting for us to go and explore, who are thriving on some system built up around hydrothermal vents. And all of that right now, it's based on our current knowledge of the physics, the chemistry, the geology, but there is a lot of speculation until we have a chance to really get there and collect the samples to learn more about it.
Awesome. We have a really awesome question that came in. So this is from Nathaniel, third grader. Hi, Nathaniel. So what are the chances of plants mutating when planted on other worlds? And I think this is a very relevant question because, when we're talking about Mars and actually making the regolith into something like soil and putting a plant there, I think that's a great question.
Awesome. Well, first off, I'll say, hi, Nathaniel. Your father reached out to me and wanted to talk about astrobiology because I hear you're very interested in it, which is awesome. There's so much for us to explore together, and I'm very glad to have you interested in being part of our exploration. And your question is a very good one. So mutation is actually always happening to life here on Earth. Mutation is a very common process. We're all mutating a little bit all the time. And it's how evolution is driven forward amongst all of the creatures that live on our planet. And so mutation, even though it sounds bad, and maybe there's like some cartoons that have, some mutated creature and it looks really gross, mutation is actually a really beautiful thing about life. And so we have every reason to think if we take plants or other organisms to other worlds, then mutations will occur there as well. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. And we might actually be able to use some of that mutation to help us in helping those plants adapt to those environments. So say we take plants to Mars as some of those plants, and we have multiple generations of these plants that we're growing in our greenhouses, we might be able to help them by selectively choosing certain plants that have mutated in the right way for us to get better crops out of them or to have a better relationship with them. Sometimes growing plants isn't just about having food, it's also about the joy of sharing our biosphere with other organisms. Plants, they take in carbon dioxide and they breathe out oxygen, which we can use to breathe. They can help us to remediate the soil. That means that they can clean up the ground. They can clean up toxic materials in the ground for us. And also some plants like, flowers are just very beautiful and they offer an aesthetic for us humans to see. And so there's a lot we don't know about the future of plant adaptation and mutation on Mars and on other worlds, but it really most likely will happen. And it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Cool. I have a question for you. So have we actually ever successfully tried to plant anything in regolith or any kind of material that was brought back from the moon, Mars? Well, not Mars, but the moon, or even Mars, because we actually know that meteorites from Mars have actually come on Earth. So I don't know if they've actually been able to even grab those and actually try to plant something.
Yeah, absolutely. So yes and yes. So we haven't brought back any Mars regolith yet to actually grow anything in, but we do have very good Mars regolith simulants. So we've recreated, and when we say regolith, for those that don't know this term, regolith is basically what we're calling Mars soil. Here on Earth, we have soil, but soil really requires life. It requires microbes to eat at the rock and break it down and create organic materials and worms and to burrow and roots from plants. And so with the moon and Mars at the surface, we use the word regolith to imply all that abiotic, inorganic material of rock at the surface. And so here on Earth, we have very good simulants of the lunar regolith, of Mars regolith. You can actually buy them. There's companies now that actually make them for sale for people, for scientists, but also for anyone interested who wants to grow a plant in some Mars regolith or just have some Mars regolith in your pocket or something. And so there are a lot of astrobotanists out there who are studying just that. How do we grow plants in the Mars regolith? My friend Rafael Lerero, who's a professor at Winston-Salem State University and also a researcher with my organization, Rafael and his undergraduate students have been working on various tests of how we can grow different kinds of plants. They've also bred some hybrid plants, and they're growing them in Mars regolith. They've also been exploring, how do we wash the perchlorates? How do we wash these salts that are toxic for humans from the Mars regolith? Rafael, one time I was speaking with him for a webinar we were both in, and I was moderating as a host for this panel, and he made a comment that I really appreciate, that in The Martian, Mark Watney would not have survived eating those potatoes because he never cleaned the perchlorates from the soil, from the regolith. And that's a very important step because we humans cannot consume those perchlorates. And so there's a lot of work going on right now with that. And I myself am actually involved in a project with the artist Lucia Monghe. She and I are developing a project for growing plants, not just in the Martian regolith, but also on Mars time. So the Mars day is just slightly longer than the Earth day. And so when we send, for instance, a new rover to Mars, some of the engineers will go on to what they call Mars time, where they're living their day by the Mars day. And so slowly over like roughly a 2-week period, their day flip-flops, where they're awake all night and sleeping in the day. Lucia and I are curious, what does Mars time do to a plant? And maybe also then what does Mars time do to human-plant interactions? And so we're thinking about, how can we grow maybe some of these more aesthetically pleasing kinds of plants that we can interact with as humans and have a relationship with? And then how can we see what the differences are in growing them in Mars time, and then maybe also having us as humans being on Mars time with these plants? How does it change our interactions with them as organisms?
Awesome. And another really great question that we have here actually too, Graham, is if there is life on Titan, could there be 2 separate biospheres, one on the surface and one on the ocean, more Earth-like, and will Dragonfly be able to detect it?
Very good question. So the first part of the question, before we get to Dragonfly, the first part of the question, I don't want to be a naysayer. I think anything is possible, but we really have to consider what's probable. And really, the surface of Titan is so very, very cold that biological catalysis reactions, metabolisms that we know of here on Earth, just simply will not function at the surface of Titan. It's just too cold. And even, if we start thinking about like the chemistry of possible life out there, it just seems highly unlikely that there'd be any life form that's catalyzing some reaction at the surface of Titan. Now, that's not to say that, maybe a few centimeters or a meter or two down into the ice at the surface, maybe there is some really cool, biology occurring that's creating a little hot pocket for life to occur then and to keep spreading and doing more reactions. But the very surface of Titan is extremely cold. And I personally don't think we're going to find life on the surface of Titan. But the second part there, so could there be a biosphere in an ocean on Titan? And we have far less data to support the hypothesis of an ocean on Titan. So through Cassini, we do have some reason to speculate there could be an ocean on Titan, but it's not nearly as well defined as we have for Enceladus or Europa. But if there is an ocean on Titan and there could be a biosphere in that ocean, that would be really intriguing. And if there is some communication, so some way for materials to get from that ocean up to the surface or close to the surface, then Dragonfly really could be a very important mission for looking at those materials. However, I do want to highlight that Dragonfly itself is not a life detection mission. So nowhere in Dragonfly are we intending to go look for life. But, we do want to keep our minds open to the possibility. And so, like I said, I'm not going to say it's not possible that there's life at the surface of Titan. I just want to, I would assume it's very, very improbable for us to find life on the surface. And so Dragonfly will be looking at some, beautiful geochemistry. It'll be hopping around, and doing some really great data analysis. And I look forward to what we're going to see and learn from Dragonfly. And maybe, again, if there is some communication with that ocean and some biosignatures of life are being derived and being evolved at the surface, then maybe Dragonfly actually will help us understand a bit more about that. But I think that we'll need, if there is potential of that, another mission down the road that really then is aimed at life detection to go to Titan as well.
Yeah. I have a question for you too. And I've seen this actually going around, in the forums and in the scientific community sometime. It's a question of ethics. And even the great Carl Sagan, I think, got involved in this many years ago when we talk about if we're going to go to a planet, and I think, the idea is, should we ethically settle a planet that has life on it? So let's say we do find microbes on Mars. And I think, even Carl Sagan made a famous comment and statement about that. If we find life on Mars, we have to leave it to the Martians. And, what are your thoughts about that? Because I do see scientists debating this, and it seems to be quite a torn mess in terms of the ethics about that. So what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot that we need to do working together, not just as scientists and not just as those of us interested in Mars exploration, but as humanity, to really make that determination together. And so, if we find signs of living organisms on the surface of Mars from Perseverance, or maybe we bring a sample back from Perseverance, we look inside and we say, oh my gosh, there appears to have been living things very recently on the surface of Mars, then, we really should have a very big ethical debate as a civilization, as a biosphere, about whether or not we have the right to go to Mars and to potentially contaminate Mars or destroy this life. That said, I also don't want to hold us back from exploring Mars or other worlds because of that potential. And I know that's hard for a lot of people to hear. So a lot of people feel like, we need to stop all exploration right now, just in case there's life there. But the truth is, we are curious and we're going to go explore. I think we can do it in an ethically sound way, as long as we're doing it intentionally, and we need to work together with our own intentions. And sure, the best of intentions can still lead to disaster, but I think we still owe it to ourselves to go and explore Mars, to send humans there. But I do think, the time for us to find out if there was life or is presently life on Mars, without potential for contamination from Earth life, that window is closing very quickly. Mm-hmm. So every time we send a spacecraft down to the surface of Mars, even with our cleanest of clean rooms here on Earth, we are still sending Earth microbes and Earth viruses and other materials from Earth to Mars. And there's been some really cool modeling. One from one of our researchers who worked through Blue Marble Space Institute of Science's a Young Scientist program. Jen Keith, she has looked at the contamination of the Martian atmosphere just from the leakage from human habitation. So when we start building human habitats on Mars, there's going to be some leaking of the atmosphere and of our cells, of bacteria and viruses into the atmosphere. And so it's going to start raining down the surface of Mars and potentially interacting with their living things if there are living things there, or being food for living things if there are living things there. And so if we do send humans soon to go explore Mars, one, I think it will increase our chances of finding other life if it's there, but it also means that we have to be prepared for accepting that there will be some contamination and spillover. But again, it's not for me alone to make that determination. It's for all of us together to have a very important debate as to whether or not we should be doing this. And so, again, I don't think it's any one person's opinion that matters. It's all of us coming together to make this determination.
Yeah, and I like how you said about the intention. If the intent is to try to do our very best not to contaminate and not to damage, I think the intent, goes a long way in a lot of aspects and facets of life. So I think that's, I think as long as the intent is good, but yeah, it's challenging. It's going to be a very challenging discussion. I don't think the real discussion is going to happen until we actually have a reason to have this said discussion. Let's hope we actually get to the point that we have said discussion, because that's going to be, the excitement's going to be just off the charts at that point. Of course, then people are going to say, "Oh, you already wrecked it because you studied it." So,
yeah, yes, it's a hard thing for us to kind of swallow. But again, I think it's important that we go with the best intentions, working together and thinking about this. So it's not fair, I think, for us just to go willy-nilly without any acceptance that this could be an issue. But again, I also would hate for us to hinder potentially, decades or centuries of exploration on that potential.
Yeah. And so actually, this is a really nice question. I think it really it follows this theme that we're talking about really well. Is that so? We're looking to bring rock and soil samples back from Mars, and of course, we're going to be bringing something potentially that could have organic compounds, could have risks in it. So, what are the risks that that the soil samples that we're actually collecting that we bring back, and is there a risk to Earth? Could we contaminate our own sphere?
I will go back to science fiction over and over again because I'm not only a huge sci-fi fan, but I think science fiction has been a way for us to prognosticate, to dream about what's possible, but then also to be prepared for what's possible. And honestly, the Andromeda Strain was one of the earlier sci-fi works I read as a young person. This is one of Michael Crichton's earliest works, where he explored this question. What happens if we have some organism, some virus from space that could destroy our life? And it's an important question. You're bringing a sample back from Mars. If there is a living Martian in there, or some cells of Martian life, or even viruses, if viruses occurred in some other world and occurred on Mars, and what if they have the potential to get free and immediately start devouring our life? What if they're just so good at eating our kind of life forms, they just obliterate us overnight and grow very quickly and overtake the biosphere? And that sounds really far-fetched, but it is a possibility that we really should consider. And so I think we'll find. So, and again, right now with the Mars sample return, we've only started the very first part of that, which is collecting some samples, and we're going to cache a bunch of them and then go collect them. And so there's many more missions that have to come. There's a mission has to land, pick up the samples, and launch those samples into orbit of Mars. We're going to have a much larger spacecraft, which the current proposal for that is going to be a very big spacecraft to take those samples from Mars back to Earth. We're going to have to somehow get those samples and then transfer them down to Earth safely. And so that's going to be an undertaking. And then also we're going to have some laboratory where we can work with these samples in a very clean room where we are doing our best to sterilize and to ensure the safety of everyone. That said, personally, I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue. Even if there is, extant life in one of these samples that we bring back from the surface of Mars, and for me personally, I actually highly doubt we're going to find extant life in those samples. I think the best potential for extant life on Mars is much deeper than we've currently gone with our drills and our rovers and landers. But even that said, so say we bring a sample back from Mars and it does have some living cellular material inside of it. I think the treatment of taking it to a clean room, of sterilizing as much as possible around the material, around the humans working in clean suits and things around it. I personally think we can do it in a way that is safe enough that there should not be a risk. But again, I'm one of those people. I won't say that anything is impossible.
Yeah, and we're pretty good at doing that now. It's not like this is going to be something that's foreign to us. We're pretty good at clean rooms and sterilizing and doing this. I mean, just look at our current situation with the pandemic. We're getting a lot of experience when it comes to actually maintaining clean living, and so I think that I think we have the skills to do that. It's amazing the skills that we have now. We're getting awfully good. I remember back when they were first landing rovers on Mars. I mean, I know we have those, the 7 minutes. Is it the 7 minutes of terror? But I mean, it's just incredible in terms of how good we're getting at actually getting things to another planet and landing on them. It's almost like it's clockwork now. It's just any old day in space. But but in reality, it's extremely difficult to get it there, to get it to the surface. Yet we're getting really good at it. That's what comes with experience, right? And it's just amazing.
Indeed, yeah. You put the best minds in the world together, and you have them solve problems. I will admit, like with Curiosity, the entry, descent, and landing system for Curiosity, before that thing landed in August of 2012, I was a naysayer. I was really, really worried. That was a huge undertaking for engineering. And for the cost of Curiosity, we could have sent several of the Mars exploration rovers, like Spirit and Opportunity. And so I was extremely worried. I was actually at a friend's wedding, a friend who's also very much into space exploration. And so almost all of us at the wedding were huge space nerds. And so during the celebration for the wedding, we all stopped celebrating for a moment to check our phones, to watch during those few minutes to see if this thing landed safely on Mars. And then it landed, and then we had even more reason to have a massive celebration. But yeah, the engineering has come so far, and like watching Perseverance land last year, watching some of these new launches from SpaceX, and there's so many more companies now coming online with so many cool ideas for human space exploration in low Earth orbit and suborbit, but also for new robotics, for sending out missions into our solar system. There's ideas for new telescopes coming online all the time that there's a lot of potential right now for the next few decades of space exploration.
That's awesome. So I just got one more question, and then after this question, I think what I'll do is I'll just kind of give you a bit of an open floor there to maybe talk a bit about Blue Marble Space and any other initiatives and things that are important to you. So the question I've got is one of my favorite topics, and I'm sure you'll like this as well, is talking about exoplanets. And so we're finding exoplanets. I think we have something like a little over 4,000, close to 5,000 exoplanets that we've discovered. I think we're still looking at about 8,000 or 9,000 that are actually in processing currently. So that number is going to skyrocket, especially when James Webb is coming. So do you see what are the possibilities of finding biosignatures on exoplanets with telescopes like James Webb and anything possibly coming up in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was a kid, we had no evidence of worlds around other stars. We didn't find the first exoplanets, definitively until 1992, and then we didn't find the first exoplanet around a main sequence star until 1995. And in that time, since then, now it's well over 4,500 exoplanets we've discovered. And again, it's mostly just in a small bubble of a few thousand light years right here around our own solar system, the Milky Way. We have found some more towards the galactic core, but there's still a lot more galaxy out there to explore and for us to find worlds around as well. And also, as we keep watching and keep building these telescopes and more missions for looking for exoplanets, as more time goes by, we're also more likely to find some of the exoplanets that are further and further away from their stars and maybe are smaller and smaller. The very first exoplanets we were discovering were those hot Jupiters. Worlds that are very big and very close to their stars and screaming as they fly around their stars. Because, with the different methods, with the transit method, with the radial transit method, the Doppler method, radial velocity method, with those methods, it's easier to find a big planet making its star wobble or a big planet occulting its star. Whereas the ones that are further away and take a long time to go around their stars or maybe are a little smaller, they're wobbling less and they're covering less starlight. And so it takes more data, and we actually have to have them go around maybe once or twice. And that can take many, many years. And so we're now more likely to start finding some of these, more Earth-like worlds, Earth-sized worlds. We've found a bunch of already, and also worlds even further and further from their stars. I personally wouldn't be surprised if we start discovering that a lot of the stars where we've already found planets have a number, maybe even dozens or hundreds of other planets around them. I wouldn't be surprised if it's very common for stars to have a large number of planets orbiting close to them, just, which is harder for us to find. But with James Webb Space Telescope and some of these other telescopes we have coming up soon, we'll be doing a lot of work on the atmospheric chemistry of these worlds. So we're not looking at their surfaces yet. There is some very cool work for looking at like clouds, if we can see them, or the glint of oceans, ocean glint coming off of these worlds. There's some cool data or modeling for how we could do that. But for the very near future, for James Webb, for instance, we're looking at the starlight that passes through that little bit of atmosphere on the edge of that planet as it's in between us and its star. A little bit of light from the star going through that atmosphere is actually enough for us to do a lot of chemistry, a lot of data analysis on the chemistry of that atmosphere. And so if there are alien biospheres out there where life has put an imprint into its atmosphere, just like we have here on Earth, then there's a very good chance that we might start finding those worlds. I wouldn't be surprised if the first 1 or 2 or even 20 of these worlds, if there's a lot of active debate about whether or not it really is a sign of life. It really, if we start finding some really cool potential biosignatures, one of the first things we'll do is start trying to figure out, are there any non-living explanations? Could there be geological processes that are causing these chemical dynamics that we're seeing in these atmospheres? But it's still a very interesting time for us, because we could start finding some of these atmospheres that look like they have disequilibria of gases in the right patterns to be explained by living processes. And there's this other world in astrobiology of technosignature research, looking for signs of technological activity. What if there are industrial civilizations on some of these worlds, and they're putting off industrially produced, artificial gases, these, larger molecules into their atmospheres that we can actually measure? What if we actually are going to start finding some signs around some of these exoplanets of space stations or larger structures emitting light, or maybe even, things like the Dyson sphere idea, that there could be large solar system size, things going on out there. And so there's a lot of potential from the telescopes that we're building, have launched right now. I'm very excited again for what we're going to find out from James Webb Space Telescope.
Awesome. And I think as Andrew Rowan said here is, I think in terms of, where do we point James Webb first? And I think TRAPPIST-1 and Proxima B is actually, two fantastic candidates. I mean, I believe TRAPPIST doesn't have 3 planets they think are in the Goldilocks zone.
Yeah, so 3 in the Goldilocks zone, several others. And so the TRAPPIST system is a great one for a multi-planet system already. And again, I personally think we're going to find out there's lots of multi-planet systems out there, but the TRAPPIST system is a great one to start with. And then Proxby, just because of how close it is to our Earth, some of these exoplanets we're going to find very close, the next few stars out. We're going to want to really look closely at those just in case, because 1, they're very close, and it feels more natural for us to have a look at them. And 2, it could make sense for us if we actually find some signs of technological activity. Communication is easier if we're actually closer to each other than being hundreds or even thousands of light years away.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Ram. I think I'm gonna kind of call it quits there on the questions for now. And I think that what I'll do is I'll send out the links to you to the different streams, and if you want to go back and look at the questions, and kind of if you have time as well. So I want to appreciate you coming, and I want to give you a little bit of opportunity to talk a little bit about the Blue Marble Space and the other initiatives that you're interested in and that you're passionate about. So kind of want to open up the floor and kind of let you talk a bit about what you're up to and what your organizations are up to.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate for the audience all the wonderful questions. I've seen there have been several more. I actually couldn't keep track of all of them coming in from different places, and so some wonderful questions. Feel free to reach out after this if you'd like to. You can find me at cosmobiota.com, and I'm more than happy to have conversations about astrobiology and all kinds of other things, including, for instance, Blue Marble Space, which is the organization that I work for. I'm the Director of Communications and Marketing for this nonprofit organization, which is really focused on the future of our civilization, on the vision of Earth as a planet with life, this vision of the blue marble, and how we can build a better future through Earth and space exploration for all of us. Blue Marble Space itself is an umbrella nonprofit that oversees a series of initiatives, including SegaNet, which is, again, the origination for the Ask an Astrobiologist show. We have Green Space, which is an indoor microgreen growing farm in Pennsylvania. We have SciWorthy.com, where scientists and journalists can write articles where they take recent research and they break it down into very simple language for people to understand what recent research is really saying. And we also have the Blue Marble Space Institute of Science, with which I'm a research investigator, and I have a group of visiting scholars working with me every summer. I have research associates through our Young Scientist program, mostly undergraduate students and recent graduates who are working for me in various projects. And so through our organization, we now have we have 66 scientists right now affiliated with us, doing research in a variety of realms in Earth and space science. And we also have several grants to do all kinds of cool research around the planet and some different things. And for any of you, if you are interested in a potential undergraduate internship, please look up the Young Scientist program. It's at bmsis.org/YSP. And you can learn more about our program there. It's an online internship, so you can do it from anywhere in the world. And personally, I think it's the best internship on the planet, but I'm also the director of the program, and so maybe I'm a little biased. Okay. I also teach the Mars Astrobiology course for Mars University. I'm also the director of logistics for the University Rover Challenge. If you haven't heard of that, it's sponsored through the Mars Society. It takes place every summer at the Mars Desert Research Station, where undergraduate engineers and scientists from around the world come together in teams at the universities. They build Mars rovers and they bring them to the desert of Utah to compete in a very wonderful competition that I've just seen some of the coolest engineering, some of the coolest thoughts from some of these young people from around the world. I've also met some who've then gone on to work for me or work with me in various projects, which is very awesome. And as Ron mentioned in my bio, I'm also really into meditation. I'm into martial arts. I'm always happy to have a conversation with anyone about ways to improve your own physical fitness. And I personally think that everyone could use just a moment of contemplation, a moment of silence, and a moment of meditation. Maybe, not trying to clear your mind, because that's almost impossible. Just a moment to be with yourself. I think we need more people in this world taking a step back from their immediate emotional reaction, their anger, their sadness, and these issues, to really just be present for themselves and for each other. Because for me, one of my lifelong dreams was to see our Earth from space, to experience what Frank White, writing in 1987, coined as the overview effect. This experience that our astronauts and those traveling to space have of this psychological shift, this cognitive shift in seeing our Earth from space, and the realization that we are a biosphere. We humans are not separate from the animals. We're not separate from the plants. We're not separate from the microbes. We are part of a biosphere, and our Earth hangs together in the void of space. And so we really should celebrate each other and take some time once in a while just to be there for each other, and not be so quick to judge, to react. And I think if we had more of that time, I think you'd find more people then being curious about exploring what else is out there, including Mars and other worlds.
Yeah, I think, we're definitely a very busy society, and internally, externally, it's like, I definitely practice meditation myself, and, I think it's beneficial. It definitely, to take just a few minutes just to be, maybe just leave it at that, just to be. Exactly. You need to think about, it's not about anything, right? It's just to be there and just be you. So I want to thank you again, Graham, for coming. I think, it's fantastic. I really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening and spending some time with me and the audience. And the questions that came in were fantastic. It was just amazing. And, you're one of the probably the most well-liked scientists that I've ever known. I'm happy to call you friend. And, I appreciate you taking the time. And I know you want to definitely want to get back and see your son and spend some time with him. So I want to say adieu and thank you again. And everybody, thank you for joining us tonight on Red Planet Live, produced by the Mars Society. And we will catch you next time. See you, everybody.
Wow.